You know how you see these modern day kind of hipster types, and how a lot of these guys are just obsessed with yoga, or they're obsessed with the culture of yoga, the idea of yoga, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna go to yoga, man. I'm gonna do yoga. I got my yoga classes to go to." Some of these people will get so entrenched into yoga that they become very cultic. And at times, it gets to the point where they actually want to go to India to join some sort of a yogic retreat. And I'm going to be going to India and we're going to be living in this place. I think it's like in Gujarat or something. Like, we're going to land in New Delhi, right? And then from Delhi, we're going to drive all the way to Gujarat. And it's just going to be this amazing experience, to see like the beautiful vegetation and the mountains of India, and we're going to be hanging out with this guy. His name is Raji Kapoor Sandam, and he has a friend. I think he's from like California, but his name is like Raji Crowcock Davis. But yeah, he's from California, right? But he's been living in India for years. And they go to India and they think it's amazing, and they have some sort of a feeling of enlightenment or, awakening. Christianity's so boring. I was born Catholic, but, Hinduism is just so much more interesting. And these people, they will pride themselves as being tolerant, as being open-minded, as having a concept of accepting people as they are. But what they fail to realize, and I think even if you told them this, they still wouldn't care, is that India, for years, has ranked as the most racist country on earth. In fact, I did a little bit of research just now, and there was a study done for the most racist countries in the year 2020 so far, and still, India maintains first place. Oh man, India, you got to get your GDP up there. You're still working on that, and you are rising up there. But don't don't forget, you're still number one when it comes to racism. And when you want to know where something is at or where something is going, it's always a good idea to find out where that something came from. To go back into its past, read the records, look at its history, and you get a much more clear idea as to where something is coming from and how it got to the current state that it is in. India right now has, and has been this way for quite some time, India has a lot of nationalism. India is an extremely nationalistic country. And that nationalism contributes to its extreme racism. And you can ask, where does this come from? And you have people who could argue and say, well, it comes from the British, right? The British did it. The British taught the Indians racism. But no, it precedes the British Empire by thousands of years. Let's go to one of the most famous, or if not one of the most famous, Hindu texts in the Hindu canon. There is a book called the Rig Veda, and it is considered to be one of the oldest Hindu texts in the Hindu religion. And the Rig Veda talks about these kings who conquered a foreign dark-skinned enemy called the Dasas. So, just to give you guys some more information on this, a little bit more detail, India is, if you look at its history, going back thousands of years, India is it's very fascinating. It's a very fascinating country because India is the result of many invasions, right? Many different peoples have invaded India. You go back thousands and thousands and thousands of years before Christ, you will find out about the Aryan invasion, right? The first wave of Aryan invaders that went into that land, that went into India. And if you look at a lot of the research that has been done, it's believed that these invaders came into India from Afghanistan. And Afghanistan was one of the lands of the Arya, the Arya being the Aryan, the Iranian people, the ancient Indo-European people. And if you read it into the ancient Iranian religion, Zoroastrianism, which actually originally came from Bactria, which is in today's Afghanistan, it talks about this land called the Arya and how these lands were destined for the Aryan people. So basically, it was like an ancient form of ethno-nationalism. And when the Persians adopted Zoroastrianism, and when they when they accepted Zoroastrianism, they became quite fanatic about it. And when they commenced their enterprise of imperialism, Zoroastrianism played a role as the ideological underpinning for Persian imperialism and expansionism. And so it was believed by the ancient Persians that all the lands that they conquered, they were the lands of, I think it's called Ahriram, I think it was something like that, which translates to, in English it translates literally into the lie. So they were conquering the lands of the lie. And they were converting these lands into becoming from being the lands of the lie into being the lands of Ahura Mazda, the lands of the truth. And so, there was this idea of conquering other lands and making them into the lands of the truth and purging the lie, or Ahriram, I think. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation. Regardless. So, before even Zoroastrianism, these Aryans were going into India, and there were multiple waves of Aryan invasions into India. There was the first one, obviously, and it was done by these Aryan peoples who came in from, I'm pretty sure, Afghanistan. Or I've actually heard that they were originally Iranian farmers. These farmers would settle into India, and then they would eventually intermix with the native population of India. The native population of India, and this really enrages Hindu nationalists for some reason. Well, I mean, it goes right back to their own racist ideas, which is, I think it emanates from self-hatred. But the original peoples of India were not Aryans. They were Aboriginal people who, ethnically speaking, were actually closer to the Aboriginals of Australia. Dark-skinned people. They were a Hamitic people who were native to that land. And so these Aryans came in and they settled, conquered, and they intermixed. And when they intermixed, of course, they had children, and this new generation came out to be a distinct people, much like how when the Spaniards settled in Latin America, they intermixed with the natives, and a new people arose. And these are what we would today consider mestizos, people who are of Spanish and indigenous ethnicity. So you had these mestizos, so to speak, in ancient India, the result of intermarriage or a biracial marriage between, maybe it's not necessarily marriage, maybe it was more like, taking concubines, but nonetheless, intermixture between Iranian farmers, agriculturalists, and indigenous Indians, Aboriginal Indians. This new people would be known as the Dravidians. But then you had another wave of Aryans who came in, and this wave of Aryans would conquer the land. They would conquer northern India. And then eventually they would expand into South India, and this expansion was described in a mythological and poetic way in a very ancient Hindu book, very famous book, known as the Mahabharata. And the Mahabharata details, much like how the Iliad or the Aeneid details ancient history in a mythological and poetic way. But nonetheless, they are historical uh, truths in these poems, and because these poems are based on history, actual things that took place in ancient history, in far antiquity. And so the Mahabharata talks about how there were these two elite Aryan families that went to war against each other, and they would make alliances with the other tribes that were living there. And eventually, these Aryans would expand into Tamil Nadu, or southern India. So, when you had this later invasion of Aryans into India, not the first one, but I want to say the second one, basically the what is known as the Rig Veda Aryans, not the first Aryan wave, but the second one. These Rig Veda Aryans would fight the people who were already living there. And these people are described as brown-skinned. They are called the Dasas. Now, some people believe that the Dasas were Aboriginal people in India. There is another belief that the Dasas were another Iranian or Indo-European people. And there is some belief or some conjecture that the Dasas were Central Asians and they were a Scythian race of people, another Indo-European people, called the Sakas. I think there is a middle ground because, some people think, oh, these were Aboriginals, or some people think, oh, these were another Iranian people. I think the truth is somewhere in the middle, and these Dasa people were most likely Dravidian or Mestizo people who were, they came as a result of intermixture between Aryans and Aboriginal people. They were of mixed race backgrounds, so to speak. So the Rig Veda talks about how the Aryans fought the dark-skinned people. And I'm going to read to you guys some lines from it. So this book I'm reading is a very fascinating book. It is called The Roots of Hinduism by a Finnish professor named Asko Parpola. This is a very fascinating book. And he says here, Parpola says here, Indra, the Indo-Aryan god, Indra, and his proteges, particularly kings Divodasa and Purokutsa, are said to have vanquished black-skinned people, enemies called Dasa, Dasyu, and Pani, who neither worshipped Indra nor sacrificed Soma, but had their own observances and were rich in cattle. Indra and Agni helped the Aryans to destroy the numerous enemy strongholds, in particular those of Dasa Sambara, situated among mountains. Though human foes are undoubtedly meant, many of these enemies are presented as demons. And it describes these people as not worshiping the right gods and not doing the correct sacrifices, basically people who have a completely foreign religion. And the Rig Veda describes these people as foreigners. So I'll read to you guys some lines from the Rig Veda regarding the vanquishment of these people. It says here in one line, "Cast your missile at the Dasyu, strengthen Arya might and brilliance, O Indra." So strengthen the Aryans in the war against the dark-skinned Dasyu people. Then it says here, Indra raised the Dasa fortresses with their dark wombs. Again, describing these people as dark. You subjugated Pipru Mrgaya, swollen with power, to Rijvan, the son of Vidatin. You scattered down the dark 50,000. Again, describing these people as dark. He smote the Dasa clans, doing his best for Purokutsa. You struck the Dasa Sambara down from the mountain. The man who follows other commandments, and here it's describing the the dasas. It says here, the man who follows other commandments, who is no son of Manu. Now this is very interesting. Manu is an ancient way of saying man. The word man is basically an English variation of a very ancient Indo-European word that goes back to the ancient Iranians. Manu, man. And Manu was believed to be not only the first human, or the first man, but also the progenitor or the father of the Aryan race. And so if you were not Aryan, you were not human, because you were not a descendant of Manu. So it says here, the man who follows other commandments, who is no son of Manu, no sacrificer, no devotee of the gods, him should your own comrade, the mountain, send tumbling down. The mountain should send down the Dasyu for easy smiting. The Dasyu of non-deeds, of non-thought, the non-man, not human, whose commandments are other, is against us. The Arya found a match for the Dasa. Down with those of no intelligence. Down with those of no intelligence. I mean, this is like an ancient version of race realism. This is like an ancient version, an ancient, historical example of race realism, the eugenics that we're seeing today, all this obsession with race and IQ. Certain people are of lower intelligence. Day after day, he drove off from their seat the other half, the black kindred, all of the same appearance. Look what it says here. Sarasvati, who is a god that represents a river. Sarasvati, who slays the foreigners. It's quite obvious what this is. And it describes these people as worshipping different gods. Now, some people think that these Dasi or Dasas were, another Iranian or another Indo-European people. I think that they were mestizos. I think that these were people of biracial or mixed race backgrounds, because it describes them as being dark-skinned. And there is another war that is described in this book. I'm pretty sure it's from the Mahabharata, and it describes the heroes as being pale-faced. So India is the most racist country in the world today, and people are wondering why. Oh, it goes back to the British. No, it goes back to the ancient ideologies that were percolated into India by this Aryan supremacist culture. And I know people are going to say Aryan is not a race, Aryan is a position. Some people could push that explanation out there, but the fact is that these Aryans were a people, and they did invade India, and they established supremacy. And that right there lies at the foundation of Hindu thought. And if you want to know where something is at and where something is going, look at where that something came from. It comes from an ideology of race obsession. Not just race obsession, but caste obsession. And this book goes into detail on some weird rituals that these ancient Aryans would operate and would orchestrate. And these rituals aren't done today, but they were very, very bizarre. Very bizarre stuff. So, for example, there was one ritual where an Aryan would wrestle with a Sudra, someone who was of the lowest caste in the caste system, in the Hindu caste system. And they would have a white sheet, and they would fight. They would basically do like a tug-of-war over this white sheet. And the Aryan had to win. It was all scripted. The Aryan would always win. And then once the Aryan pulled that sheet from the Sudra's hands, he would then chase the Sudra. But there's a lot of bizarre stuff that you'll find. But it all goes back to this weird supremacist tribalist ideology. And so when we wonder, like, why is India so racist? Or when we wonder, or when we have these crazy ideas of, like, finding enlightenment in India, the people who claim to be, like, the most tolerant people, the most open-minded people, they're actually delving into an ideology whose roots are are racial. Anyway, hope you guys have enjoyed this message. Hope you guys have learned something from this message. You guys just heard some theology. God bless.